Welcome to Dan the Road Trip Guy. I'm your host, Dan, and each week we'll embark on a new adventure, discovering memory and life lessons of our incredible guests. From everyday travelers to thrill seekers and everyone in between, this podcast is your front row seat to inspiring stories of passion, resilience, and the pursuit of happiness. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. I'm on the road again today, which is a pleasure for me. I'm in the home of my guest, Terry Jacobs, and actually Susan, his wife, is here with us. So this is a special treat for me. Terry, if you're from Cincinnati, you probably recognize the name. He's a successful businessman, entrepreneur, executive. He's also, or if you're from Moorhead, Kentucky, you might know Terry and Susan from Moorhead because they were very active in the football program there. I haven't seen Terry or Susan in a number of years. We went to church together years ago. And the one thing I can say about Terry is when you walk away from him, you simply feel better about yourself. Welcome, Terry, Susan, to Dan the Road Trip Guy.
Welcome to our home.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor. Terry, take a couple minutes. Tell me, who is Terry Jacobs?
Terry Jacobs is a little boy that was born in Georgia to a dad who was an electrician for General Electric, didn't finish high school, neither did my mother, and had two kids, myself and my younger sister, who was 3 years younger than me. But he died when I was 9 years old. Mother didn't have any kind of an education. We lost everything. He had a very good job working for General Electric, but he didn't have life insurance. What didn't seem important when you were 34 years old. Needed something for your family to fall back on. Well, he died on Labor Day in 1952. We lost our house. We lost our cars. We lost just about everything that you can lose. It was a tough life growing up without a dad. I loved football. So I ended up playing on the local school teams and high school football. Wanted to go on to college and play football in college, but I had severe injury and knee injury when I was a senior in high school, and that ended that dream. I ended up joining the Marine Corps. I was good enough to go in the Marine Corps, but not good enough to play football. I tell people outside of marrying my wife, which is a story all to itself. It was the best thing it ever did for me was join the Marine Corps. Because it gave me a chance to get to know things about myself that I never would know otherwise, and to experience things that I never would have gotten a chance to experience. It taught me a lot about wisdom, character, what you can do if you really work at it hard enough and you're dedicated to trying to make it happen. That propelled me all the way through school in a very difficult profession called the actuarial career. Nobody even knew how to spell actuary when I first started, but I was always good in math. I wasn't good at much else, but I was pretty good in math. That gave me the ability to use that to go on and get as far as becoming a fellow of the Casualty Actuarial Society with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in actuarial science, and became youngest senior officers in several major insurance companies that I would have gotten to have those opportunities had it not been for being in the actuarial profession. It allowed me to do a lot of things in my life, including be the entrepreneur that I ultimately always wanted to do. So that's who Terry Jacobs is.
That's a great introduction. Thank you. This is Dan the Road Trip Guy. And I love to ask, what was your first car?
It was a 1940 Hudson Hornet.
Hudson Hornet.
It was a little coupe. It didn't run when I bought it, but we finally got it to run. And so that was my first car. And that was when I lived in Florida. My mother remarried. As I said before, my dad died when I was 9 years old. But when I was about 13 years old, she remarried. So I was in Florida, and he had a buddy in the Air Force. We were at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. that owned this Hudson Hornet and wanted to sell it. So we paid $100 for it.
A non-running car.
For a non-running, and it didn't do much of anything except take a lot of money. I did get a chance to take it out a couple of times and do some things, but then my mother and my stepfather got into a terrible argument, and she ended up separating from him. I moved our family back from Tampa to Decatur, Georgia.
Okay.
Because that was where I really felt more comfortable and had gotten a lot of my early education from the Decatur schools.
Sure.
So I had friends in school there.
So did you sell that Hudson or give it away?
I left it.
You just left it. Let somebody else deal with it.
I left it, and we took off and went back to Decatur. I don't know if anybody ever bought it from my stepfather or not, but I didn't have to deal with that. I just took off and left. And I drove. I didn't even have a driver's license yet because you had to be 16 to get a driver's license. And I hadn't turned 16 yet. We rented a truck, put all our furniture on that truck, and drove back to Atlanta, which I drove the truck, never having driven a truck before, and moved our family back to Decatur, Georgia, where I ended up graduating from high school, met my lovely wife. It set off a lot of things in our lives that made we had a wonderful life, really.
Yeah. Thank you. Have you ever taken any epic road trips, maybe with Susan or as a family? Is there a trip that just sticks out in your mind as just one of those trips that you would relive?
A lot of our road trips with Pat and Wayne.
Oh,
We used to go skiing.
skiing. Okay. Didn't know that. See, I'm going to learn a lot of stuff today.
And they lived up the street about 4 houses up, and they had a son that was a year older than Jeff. But Wayne and I got involved in coaching the Pee Wee football teams. We were involved together all the way through high school and even into some of the college stuff that I ended up doing. But I guess the most memorable ski trip we had was one when we had 11 people in a Ford van that made this trip driving from here to Colorado. And that was an experience that I don't think it'd be easy to repeat. But having 11 kids, including Lynn, who was only about 2 or 3 years old at the time.
She was sitting on the ice chest.
This would be,
Back then.
if you wanted to see a group of people traveling, that everything we did was against the law because we had no safety protection.
Well, they didn't require it.
No, they didn't. We didn't even have seat belts in this van. So
You know what? We all survived those days, right? I mean, I grew up on a road trip laying in the floor of our car. My brother had the seat.
yeah.
We were driving to Florida, and I'm laying in the floorboard.
Well, we had a lot of that going on.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, it was.
Did you have a good ski trip once you got there?
Well, we had never been skiing. It was our very first ski trip.
Let's take a trip and go skiing.
And so,
Skiing.
they got us interested in this. And we had to go to a ski store and buy things like boots. We ended up buying our skis instead of renting them. But that was a beginning of a wonderful relationship that lasted 20, 30 years with the Smiths. We've got some great.
They took Jeff
Yeah, they
with them.
Yeah.
And he loved it.
He was 8, 9 years old.
Next year, they said, "Will you guys go with us and ski?"
Now, did you start skiing then?
Yes, yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
Easy slope. Skiing.
We got some interesting ski stories too,
I bet.
where I convinced her to go down an expert slope in a snowstorm because we couldn't get off the mountain otherwise.
And so
And she's never let me forget that.
I always skied the easy road, whatever, but I made a wrong turn one time and ended up like a double black
You're like,
snake.
got to get down, right?
I was up there for 45 minutes. It was getting dark. And I said, the slope I had to go off, they had to jump off of it. The skiers would come flying by and fly through the air and land. And finally I said, I've got to go. So I prayed about it and finally did it. And I actually landed it. Like, wow.
Well,
I didn't go back out.
She didn't speak to me for a long time.
Oh, that's good. It's good to have those memories.
Oh, it was. We had some great times skiing with that family, and we're still close. Unfortunately, he's the one that died of Parkinson's disease, but we still talk to Patty. She lives across from Moeller High School now.
We've actually had a lot of good road trips, going to football games, games, all over the place.
Terry, I've known you all these years. I never knew you served our country in the Marines. Tell us the story of why you joined the Marines.
So there were four of us who decided one night we were out. We said, "What are you going to do after you graduate?" "I don't know." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." So after a long discussion, one of our older friends had just gotten out of the Marine Corps boot camp, and he came to school one Friday morning. And he looked sharp. I mean, he was all dressed in his uniform. His name was Joel Rogers, who I just heard from my classmate down there that he just died last week. One of the guys, and Meatball was one of my friends in school. He was a pretty good football player. But he said, "Well, why don't we join the Marine Corps?" I said, "What?" He said, "You got anything else you're going to do?" "No, I'm just going to try to get the best job I can get," which might have been working at a service station that I worked at during the summers down there. The four of us went down to the recruiting station on Georgia Tech campus, signed up to join the Marine Corps.
Okay.
I was only 17 years old, so I wasn't old enough. You're supposed to be 18. The recruiting officer at Georgia Tech said, "You're not old enough to join on your own, son. So your mother will have to sign to give you permission to join." And he said, "Will she do that?" And I said, "I don't think so." I said, "But I'll just go ahead and sign in anyway, and I'll forge her name." He said, "You can't do that." I said, "Well, that's the only way you're going to get me." We figured out a way to get a signature. My mother said, "You can't go in the Marine Corps. You'll get killed." And I said, "Well, there's a lot of people who've done the same thing and haven't gotten killed, but some of them do get killed." I signed up at age 17, still in high school. Started going to reserve meetings while I was still in high school. And then we graduated on, I think, the first Friday of June that year, 1960. The four of us were off to boot camp. We signed up on a Friday and took off on Monday morning to head into Parris Island, South Carolina. And that was the best thing I could have ever done because it taught me a lot of things that I remembered. Some old sayings, and you can ask Jeff some of the things that I've remembered that have had a big impact on a lot of things that I've done in life. Gave me I guess, the confidence and the ability to go through the Marine Corps. It was really tough training. There were times when you wanted to quit, times when they wanted you to quit. We made it. All four of us made it through boot camp, and we were good friends. We were all the way through the Marine reserves for a total of 8 years.
8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. How did you all meet? Tell us that story.
Well, I was, 13 years old, maybe 14, when I first went into the Clark's Music on the square in Decatur. And she was in there. She was working behind the cash register. And I had enough money. I'd saved up enough money cutting grass and doing all these things. I needed a baseball bat because I was playing on the Little League team. Made the All-Star team, by the way. She came up to me and said, "May I help you?" And I said, "I'm looking to buy a baseball bat." She said, "Well, here are baseball bats over here." So we went over and I looked at her and said, "This is a good-looking little girl." And I said, "I need to get to know her if I can." So we got to talk, and I bought the baseball bat. Then another week or so, I went back in there looking for something else. But I would go in there periodically, hoping I could convince her. We had a local movie house that I could convince her to go to the movie with me because I didn't have enough money to do a real date. Tell her that was when I fell in love with you, those brown eyes of yours and her long ponytail. Interesting thing, she's got dark hair and I got white hair.
Yeah. And and you've been married, I think you told me 63 years.
Yeah.
Now, did you get married?
We got married.
He was 20, I was 18.
I came back from Marine Corps, went to University of Georgia for a year, hoping I could be a walk-on to play football. Still had that desire to play football. Ran out of money, didn't get a scholarship. Susan and I started dating. I finally went to a party that I was crashing. I wasn't invited, but three of my friends and I went to this party at one of her close friends' house, a big house up on a big hill. She was there with one of the guys who was playing in a band, and so she didn't have anybody to talk to most of the night because he was playing in a band. So I took advantage of his disadvantage and finally convinced her to go out with me.
Yeah.
And that was our beginning of our first date. We went to see Spartacus. Funny story about Spartacus.
Yeah.
I went to see Spartacus with 5 different girls on 5 succeeding nights because they all wanted to see Spartacus.
Okay.
I hated Spartacus.
You really hated it by the 5th showing, right?
It was the start of something really good. So we dated throughout. I was going to school at night at Georgia State because I transferred from University of Georgia. I had run into somebody that I went to high school with in the hallway. And he said, "Terry, what are you doing?" I said, I'm going to school here at Georgia State. And he said, "Well, what are you majoring in?" I said, "I have no idea. Maybe accounting." And he said, "Well, you're always good at math. Why don't you look into this actuarial program that I'm involved in? You were always good at math." And I said, "What is an actuary?" He says, "Well, it's somebody that makes the rates, determines the liabilities that we have to put up." He said, "It's a very strict profession, but it's very rewarding." And he said, "And you should be able to do it." So I went and knocked on the door at the office of the head of the actuarial education department at Georgia State and said, Dr. Zubay was his name, Eli Zubay and Floyd Harper. I said, "I'm interested in the actuarial program. Would you have a few minutes to talk to me about it?" So they said, "Yeah, usually what we do is we ask people to take this aptitude test to see if you're capable of passing the actuarial exam." So they said, "Would you have time to do that?" So I said, "Got nothing else to do." I took the actuarial aptitude test. And they advised me after consulting with each other not to do it. "You didn't do very well on our aptitude test." I said, "I never saw any of those problems." I said, "I've never studied actuarial programs or math." And they said, "Well, people that don't do well on this test usually can't make it through the actuarial program." They said, "We'll let you come in if you insist on doing it, but we advise you that it's probably not going to be something you want to do." So right then I decided I'm going to do this. I enrolled in the actuarial program and never forget the very first night of class that we had. Dr. Harper comes in and he says, "My name is Dr. Floyd Harper, and I believe in the, what do you call it, something principe." And none of us knew what that was. He says, "It's work, work, and more work." And I said, "I can do that, but I don't know if I'll be able to do this." So I ended up transferring into the actuarial program, ended up passing the second test. There was a series of 10 tests that you had to pass, actuarial exams. I passed part 2 before I passed part 1. They then encouraged me, said, "You can do this," because we've never had anybody do what you just did, pass part 2 before passing part 1. So to make a long story, after about 6 years of studying actuarial science, becoming the head of the actuarial club, and being involved in recruiting and all of that, I ended up becoming an actuary. I was an associate of the Actuarial Society by the time I got out of undergraduate school, which put me in a highlight of a lot of people were looking for actuaries back then. It was a rare opportunity.
That was in the 70s, I believe.
Well, I graduated in 1970 with my master's degree. And I've got a plaque around here somewhere that's got my name on it in the year that I became a fellow. But that put me in a spotlight where a A lot of people were looking at the time, I thought I was way behind everybody else because all my friends had graduated and gone on to get a major job. And here I was still going to school. So I thought I was behind everybody else. But all of a sudden, I jumped to the head of the class when I passed those exams. And she was there with me, helping me, encouraging me, sometimes discouraging me because it was tough. We had no family life. We got a grandson, Jacob, Lynn's son, who's becoming an actuary. And I've advised him, I said, Jacob, this is a very difficult field. If you don't want to put the time in, don't do it because you'll be frustrated. I said, when I was taking the exams, I had to devote every minute that I could find to studying. And I said, it paid off for me. But unless you're willing to put the time in, don't do it because you'll be frustrated. Fortunately, he's passed 4 of those exams now. And he's just got engaged, but he's a great kid. And he always said, I'm doing this because of my papa's an actuary.
There you go. There's some legacy for you.
I went to work for a company that offered to pay my graduate school tuition while I was still at Georgia State. But the only thing that we had to do was make a commitment to move to Baltimore because that's where they were located. It was a company called USF&G. That's how we ended up getting to Maryland. I graduated with a master's degree in actuarial science and the associateship degree. We ended up moving in July or August of 1967 to Baltimore, Maryland, actually Cockeysville, Maryland.
That was Jeff was born.
Jeff was born right before we moved. When I got to Baltimore, I was highly visible for being such a young guy with an associate's degree in actuarial science. And I did pretty well in my job at USF&G. And I started getting calls from headhunters. I got a call from somebody that wanted to hire me at, where was that, honey? That was
the Little Aetna.
The Little Aetna, Little Aetna, which was in Hartford, Connecticut. So they offered me about a $5,000 raise over what I was making, which was a lot of money back then.
A lot of money back then,
A lot of money. And so I said, we can finally afford to have an extra hamburger sometime. But I did very well there. I became the youngest officer in the history of the Aetna Insurance Company, which was like 150 years old company. So they made a big deal out of that, and I got a lot of publicity for being so young and being an officer of an old line insurance company that was very well respected. So they get me to Aetna Insurance Company. An opportunity I thought of a lifetime came along because Prudential, which at that time was the largest insurance company in the world, or a life insurance company, but were founded in the 1700s. They had decided that they needed something to help their sales force sell more life insurance. So they thought they would get into the personal lines, automobile, homeowners business, that would be a good way for them to grow their clientele and the lines of business. They gave us $180 million to start a brand new company from scratch. And I was the 3rd employee they hired. I thought it was an opportunity of a lifetime until one day I was working for some guy who was the vice president in charge of the department that I was over. A very difficult person to work with. And one day we were in a meeting and he said a bunch of things that I took as an insult and almost punched him out, which I decided that was not a good thing to do. His boss was a guy named David Sherwood, who later went on to become the chairman of the board of all Prudential worldwide. But I told David, I cannot work with this guy. I'll end up getting into a fight with him, which will create a problem for everybody, and especially me. And so I said, I'm going to start looking for something else to do. He said, oh, you can't do that. You're our youngest officer. You're highly visible. You got a great career here. And I said, I don't know if I can survive till next week with this guy. He tried to talk me out of it. He sent me to the chairman of the board's office, which was in Newark, New Jersey. They tried to talk me out of leaving, and I got a call one day from a guy named Ron Walker during this process. And Ron Walker was executive VP of American Financial Group. And somebody had recommended me. They had just bought Great American Insurance. And somebody recommended me. He says, here's a young guy that you really ought to look into hiring because we think he's going to do great things. guy named Ray Johnson was the one that I worked with at Little Aetna, who had left and gone to work for Great American. So I went back from a meeting with my then boss, Paul Simpson, and there was a note on my desk with my secretary put a big star on it, and she said, "Call this guy. His name is Ron Walker." And I said, "Who is Ron Walker?" And she says, "I don't know, but he sounds important." So I called him back, and he said, "Terry, I'm Ron Walker. We're looking to build a new management team for this company that we just bought, and your name has been highly recommended to us several times. Would you be interested in coming to Cincinnati to talk to us about coming to work for us?" I was in the right mood, and I said, "Yes, I would." So I ended up being invited by them to come back to Cincinnati, ended up doing interviews with them, and they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. It was a big salary, big bonus, and a big car. That's how I came to work for American Financial. And I worked with them. The company that I was with then was American Financial's Great American Insurance. Ron called me one day between the time I had accepted the offer and before I had moved to Cincinnati. He said, "Terry, I need to talk to you about something that's very critical." And so I said, "Okay, can we do it over the phone?" He said, "No, I want to do it in person." So I thought, oh, well, they're changing their mind or something. But I went back to Cincinnati. And Ron Walker told me, "Terry, if you're accepting this job because it's located in Los Angeles, company's not going to be located in Los Angeles. We're going to move it back here to Cincinnati." And I said, I double my commitment.
Yes and yes.
Turned out that was a great decision. We love Cincinnati and did very well here.
At some point, you had an itch then to, you had that entrepreneurial itch. You got a great job.
But at some point, I wanted be involved in doing my own thing. Took me 2 years to figure out what it was. But it was the beginning of the start of Jacor. I'd never been in a radio station before.
What led you to radio?
Glenn Mayfield. Do you know Glenn
who
Mayfield?
that is.
Glenn Mayfield's father was Dr. Mayfield of the Mayfield Clinic. Glenn Mayfield had been a senior officer at First National Bank in Cincinnati. He went out on his own to be a financial consultant, helping people start businesses and getting them financed. He was very instrumental in helping me decide what profession to get into. I told him, first time I met with Glenn, I said, "Glenn, I want to change careers and I want to start something that I can grow on my own." He said, "Well, what are your aspirations?" I said, "Well, if we could be the biggest in the radio business, that would that would make me happy." I said, "But I understand there's a long way between here and there." He said, "Well, I'll be happy to work with you." So we did all kinds of planning and working on what would be a good idea. And the radio business was perfect for an entrepreneur back then because you were limited on how many radio stations you could own. The way you grow a radio company was you could only own 7 AM radio stations and 7 FM. I had an opportunity to start off owning 4. And the game back then was sell the small ones and buy bigger ones. So I eventually built Jacor into the 8th largest radio company in the country. It was very successful. We did a public offering, which was unheard of back then. You didn't do small IPOs like that. But we did one, and we raised $5 million with our first offer. And then...
Sounds small today when you think about today, right?
It does. And then I had an opportunity to buy some more radio stations. We not only worked with Glenn, we worked with Mercer Reynolds, who is the owner of the St. Louis Cardinals. Bill DeWitt had a company called Reynolds and DeWitt, which was in the investment banking business. So they signed on with us, and we raised $17 million.
Okay.
So we raised more money, and then we were buying stations and spinning off small ones and keeping the bigger ones. And then we got introduced to Solomon Brothers, who did a $40 million public offering. We ended up buying WLW and WEBN. That was really the send-off to the bigger opportunities, bigger money, more money. But it was an opportunity to work with the big capitalists on Wall Street and get to know a lot of the people in the business. I built that company to the point where we were very attractive to the outside world at that point. So we ended up selling it to Clear Channel.
Where did they rank in the
Clear Channel was number 2.
Number 2.
They gave me some stock and some other money, other opportunities, and they sold me 2 radio stations to start my next company, which was Regent Community. So we built that company into a very large company because the restrictions on ownership had changed from owning 7 AMs to 12 AMs and 12 FM. So you could be a much bigger company. And we did that. And we ended up owning the biggest companies, the biggest radio stations in Louisville, Dayton, Las Vegas, Atlanta, Tampa, Florida. So we had some really big markets. That company became so attractive that Clear Channel, who we had sold Jacor to, came along and said, we'd like to buy this company. And so I said, well, we think it's too early to sell. And they said, no, we don't care. We like what you've done. So I ended up selling the company, Clear Channel, again. And then I started the third version of my radio venture, which was a big mistake. Quit while you're ahead is what I should have learned.
Should have listened to Susan probably, because she probably told you.
We had a lot of money, could have lived a very nice life for what we had, but I was still ambitious, wanting to grow something. Big mistake, but that ultimately led to our getting into the real estate.
Then you got into real estate. That's, let's see, we got radio and we got real estate. And that went well.
We did well in that. We accumulated a lot of apartments. We were in the home building business. Jeff was very much involved in that. And we did pretty well in that until the market fell apart. That was after 9/11 and all this stuff. So the banks all decided they didn't have an appetite to do much of anything, much less help people build companies. So that was a start of a tough time. We had enough money to keep this house and live a pretty nice life.
I did have one question. I'd written it down. Did you have a favorite radio station that you bought along the way? Was there one that just...
Atlanta.
It was your favorite?
It was my hometown. I went back on top of the world down there. Interestingly enough, our high school union, the 25th year anniversary, was in Atlanta. They introduced me at the dinner that night as the Radio Entrepreneur of the Year. I was Radio Entrepreneur of the Year 2 years ahead, but not that year. But that was probably the time I felt I was flying the high. It felt good. Should have stopped then, but I didn't.
What would you tell a young person today if they came to you and said, Terry, I want to start a business? What would you tell them?
Told many people this. You're going to say that the hardest thing I ever did in my life was start a new company. And then I'm going to tell you, it's not the hardest thing you ever did. You're about to face the hardest thing you ever did. I said, you're going to want to quit many times. You're going to give up. You're going to think that the financial world hates you, which they probably do. And I said, you got to have an attitude of, I'm not going to quit. I'm just not going to give up. I've had this dream and I want to follow it and I'm going to do it. I said, it's the hardest thing you've ever done in your life, except multiply it by 2. And I said, and then the amount of money you're going to need is going to be the most money you ever did. And I said, but it's not. Multiply it by 3. And then I say, you're going to want to quit 5 or 6 times in this process, but you got to say, I'm not quitting. And you got to mean it. You're not going to quit. It's not going to give up. That's the best advice I can give anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur. It's difficult, very hard.
Good advice.
Yeah.
From a guy who knows.
who's been there.
So we mentioned Morehead football earlier on, and yes, I was there, and I saw your name a few years ago. My wife and I went to Eastern, so Morehead was a
did you
competitor.
Really?
You're very active in
Dan, I wish you hadn't told me that.
Yeah. There's those Eagles and those Colonels, You're very active in the school down there. Of course, you had 2 sons who played football there.
Well, it was a situation where Howard was a very good football player in high school. And he got hurt. He broke his foot his senior year in high school. He wanted to play college football, and he was good. His line coach in college told me that Howard was the best pass blocking center he had ever coached in his life. And he had coached a lot of NFL players. Jeffrey was very good, but not as big as his brother. Jeffrey was quick, and he was a hard worker, very strong. But when Howard got involved down there, the college was going through a turmoil. They had to fire a president of the university, and they brought in a guy named Reinhardt who came in from Slippery Rock, which really is a name.
Yeah, I think I've
Slippery
heard
Rock
that. Yeah.
University. They were having a really tough time. They started talking about, well, we'll just get rid of football. We'll stop playing football as a university. And I said, you got some great young kids here who deserve an opportunity. So this is the only way that a lot of these kids will ever go to college. And we can't give up and just turn them out to pasture and say, it was a good idea, but it didn't work. So I went to work on raising money and improving the facilities. We put down artificial turf on the field. We built them a brand new weight room. We built them a brand new medical training room. We built new offices for the coaches, and they ended up doing very well the next year. As a matter of fact, they hold the record of the greatest comeback victory, AA football in history. They were behind 35-0 to Wichita State University on a Saturday and came back to win that game 36-35. I got thrown out of. That's the game I got thrown out of.
I didn't know if I was going to bring that up, but we have a mutual friend who said, make sure you ask him about that game, because he said Mr. Jacobs wasn't only a supporter, he was very active during the games.
Well, it's not the thing that I'm the most proud of, but I think I inspired them to go, because I got kicked out of the game at halftime, and they came back in that next half and just took it to them. It was probably the most satisfying time that we had been. Susan was there. We chartered a plane, and we flew there with them. Most of the team went on the plane with us. But it was and we talk about it till now. Everybody remembers that. I remember that Wichita State game.
Susan, did you like football, or do you just?
Yeah.
You did. That's probably good, right?
Absolutely.
She used to
marry anyone if you like sport. Marry anyone does not like sport.
Well, she turned out to be the mother of the team.
Or if you love pets, don't marry someone who doesn't love pets.
So we're getting some marriage advice here too in this episode.
Absolutely.
That's good. I like it. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Imagine for a minute you could take a road trip, because it's just Dan, the road trip guy, and you can, anybody, living or deceased, who would that be? Where would you go? And what do you think you would talk about? And you can go with Susan.
Ski trip. We had wonderful times on our ski trips with the Smiths. We had a lot of people join us on several of those trips, but almost for every year between I don't even remember when we started, but we had a ski trip with the family, and we always loved that. We'd all go out to dinner all night, sit around a fire and have a glass of wine. Those are wonderful times, and we have stayed close friends with the Smiths. Unfortunately, Wayne died a couple of years ago, but his wife, Pat, has been a real friend of ours for a long time. I would say that of the trips that we've taken, those were the most enjoyable ones. We've never been travelers in terms of cruises. We've been on one cruise. She got sick as a dog, and we never got to go on another one.
This has been great. One last question. I might just ask Susan this question too. You gave some business advice for an entrepreneur or young person walks up to you, but as far as life, what kind of advice would you give somebody on just living a wonderful life?
Always try to do what's right. Always try to do what's right, or even when it looks like it might not be the right thing. Because if you don't, your conscience will bother you the rest of your life. And it will always be something you'll regret. And there are a lot of things I'd go back and turn around the other and do it a different way. But I think that's the best advice I could give anybody, is no matter how hard it is, no matter how much pain it is, always do what you think is the right thing to do.
How about you, Susan? What would you tell people? You guys been married a long time.
Marry the right wife.
Well, marry the right wife is a given.
First of all, accept Jesus as your Savior. You can find the Lord. So important.
There's another important thing. I was baptized in a Marine Corps swimming pool at Paris Island. Yeah.
Wow.
Which it's gotten me through and us through so it's very important. And you have to have forgiveness, lots of love. It'll take a lot and helps you get through. We've been through so much, but it's been a wonderful life.
63 years, 63 or 4?
63.
63, you're still sitting here together.
Yeah.
Health is relatively good.
Yeah.
And it's taken the good Lord, lots of prayers, blessings, realizing the blessings, many miracles, truly.
Then we've evolved to the point where Susan and I pray together every night when we go to bed.
Lots of prayers. Just realizing what the Lord has done for you and thanking Him and being grateful and loving your family and your friends. And
well, this has been great. Thank you. Well, we might do it again. Who knows? We might just end up writing a book doing this, So,
well,
and this was a double treat with Susan being here. I mean, it really is.
We've been through everything together, so we know a lot about each other.
Yeah,
having been through so much together.
Again, it's been probably 25 years, maybe. I don't know that I met you all.
Dan, thank you.
Thank you. This was so fun.
Thank you for tuning in to Dan, the Road Trip Guy. I hope you enjoyed our journey today and the stories that were shared. If you have any thoughts or questions or stories of your own, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and family and help us to spread the joy of road trips and great conversations. Until next time, keep driving, keep exploring, and keep having those amazing conversations. Safe travels. And remember, you can find me on the internet at dantheroadtripguy.com.